the there we go. We're the group that has organized most of the content, although we've gotten a lot of help from our communications and admin team to just sort of make this happen as a remote event. I want to thank all of them too. But I see so many familiar names and faces around the Zoom here. And I guess that's what happens when you stick around long enough in one profession. But I also see a lot of new names and faces too, and I'm really glad to see everybody here and thank everybody for attending. And I hope that everybody is safe and well in this crazy year. So I'm going to spend just a minute on why we're doing this user conference for the third time. And it really started from a conversation that Yanmei Oh, who's a team leader for our transportation modeling and analysis team, a conversation we had just over 2 years ago. And we were talking about just the need to evolve the relationship that we have with the group of people who use and rely on our travel demand model primarily at that time, from what was really a one-direction relationship to more of a two-direction relationship, and really move from just distributing files to having more of a dialogue with the user community that relies on some of the tools and data that we prepare. And the first users conference really came out of that conversation. We knew that doing something like this once probably was not a really smart play. It often takes a bit of repetition to actually get a concept like this to sort of take hold and to really get some benefit from it. And fortunately, we got a lot of encouragement from many of you to continue with this as an annual event. And so here we are for the third time now. So we knew that we'd need to repeat and to really test this out. And for us, it's been of great value. We do feel like we have a much better connection to all of you than we had in the past. And we hope that you feel a little bit of that too. So for SACOG, there are really, what I'd say there's three main goals for what we want to get out of this user conference. And one goal is pretty simple. We just want to share what we've been doing over the last year regarding travel demand modeling, data and analysis tools, especially the regional variety. So in each session, you will get a little bit of that, some reporting out of what we've been up to and what we've accomplished since the 2020 user conference. A second thing is we want to share with you some of our ideas about what issues and what priorities related to travel modeling, data and analysis tools, what those issues and priorities will be for the coming year. And then the third goal really, and this is really the most important thing for us with this event, is to hear from you. We want to get your input on what we see as the priority issues that should drive what we spend our resources on here. And we hope that this input is not limited to just this event, this user conference, but this is really an important milestone for that. And it really is our attempt to set what we feel like is the agenda for us for the coming year. So those are the three goals really. And like I said, you'll hear a little bit of each one of those in each session that you attend. So some expectation management here. Unfortunately, this is not a true democracy. So we are really interested in hearing your thoughts, hearing your suggestions, hearing your preferences. But it's not going to, and there is some polling involved in pretty much each one of the sessions. But the polling is really just a way of trying to register what people are thinking. It's not a vote. It isn't a system of majority rule here, unfortunately. We do have some constraints. We've got serious constraints on staff time and budget, and they're a little bit harder constraints this year than in past years. So we can't do everything that everybody might want us to do. And then the other thing is we have our own requirements, our own constraints and our own priorities for what we need to get done this year, partly to fulfill our statutory role as an MPO, and partly to just address some of the priorities that we're hearing from our board of directors. So when we ask you to provide input, it doesn't mean that we will drop everything to do what you're telling us to do, but we do think it's important to ask, to hear, and then to consider and try and move our work as to address as many of your concerns as we possibly can, even if we can't do it all. So that's one expectation that I need to manage, and hopefully everybody understands that. And then the second expectation is really around the crazy year that we've just all lived through. It's really been a humdinger of a year, 2020 and the start of 2021, and more to come, I guess. You know, here we are on Zoom, God bless it, for sure. But you know, in my life, this year has really been probably the most dramatic year since 2001 and 9/11. And there's more to come for sure. You know, we're not done with this. But in terms of the pandemic and COVID and how the impacts it's had on how people travel and what their transportation needs are, it's been a particularly dramatic year. You can start with shelter-in-place orders, remote working, school over Zoom, Teams, Google Meets, you name it. Online shopping, home delivery, it goes on and on and on in terms of how people have changed what they are doing with travel and what their travel needs are. You know, one thing I'm absolutely positive of is that all of these changes will leave a mark on how we travel in the longer haul. But the other thing that I'm absolutely sure of is at this moment in time, I have no idea how that's going to actually land, and what marks those that will be left by all that. So if you're expecting to hear today how SACOG will adapt our travel model to catch up with those changes, you're probably going to leave this conference pretty disappointed, I'm afraid. We are still watching as many data sources as we can afford to do and track aggregate impact on how all this affects traffic volumes, BMT, transit usage, all those things at aggregate level. But we don't know exactly how this is going to land finally, and we don't know exactly how we are going to need to adapt our tools. And once all those changes and all that drama sort of settles out and stabilizes into whatever a new normal might look like, we're still trying to navigate our way to that. And the one word that I would say I've learned very well this year is adaptability. We've had to adapt a number of times, as have, I'm sure, all of you out there for sure. And we're going to have to continue to adapt. And so that really is the watchword for the coming year, is adaptability. So like I said, we're kind of in a watch and monitor mode. We're trying to learn as much as we can. And partly we want to hear from you on what we should be paying attention to in terms of data sources out there to tell kind of when things are stabilizing, when we have a new normal that we can start looking at more from planning purposes. So that's the expectation management. Hopefully that all makes sense to everybody. Katie, do you want to go to the next slide, please? There's a few, sorry, prior slide. Yeah, there we go. Just a couple reminders on some Zoom etiquette and what we're going to be doing with this session. We are recording everything, the chat as well as the video. So just be aware of that. Use mute when you're listening. We did set it up as a Zoom meeting and not as a webinar, so there is a chance for people to talk. We hope that we can capture some of that magic of a face-to-face meeting through that means, but it also means you do need to manage the mute button. Use the chat window as much as you possibly can to bring up questions through the course of the presentations. We will provide an opportunity at the end of each presenter to kind of ask a few informational questions, and then we have some planned discussion at the end of each session. So keep that in mind. And then there will be some interactive polls through the course of the year conference for each session, so be ready to participate in those. Go on to the next slide, Casey or Katie. So one thing I wanted to do is just the data analysis group, and which I manage here at SACOG. And it's composed of 2 teams. Both teams have the same focus, which is really to provide regional data and regional tools to support the decision making that SACOG has to engage in, and as much as possible to help support the decision making that our member agencies need to do around transportation and land use. There are 2 teams. There's the transportation modeling and analysis team. Primary focus of that team is the SACSIM travel demand model, just maintaining that, developing it over time, and distributing files to folks who need them. Big data is another part of that, an increasing part of that, and big data in several different sources, which will come up later in one of the sessions. And then just any regional data source that gets into transportation, it becomes a concern of this team. The transportation modeling analysis is led by Yeonmei Oh, who many of you know, and unfortunately she couldn't be here for the user conference this week. So I'm filling in for her as best I can. And then the other team members are Kyle Shipley, who led just the organization and development of this event. And then Shengyi Gao and Darren Conley are also team members on the transportation modeling and analysis team. The other team is data and mapping services. The main focus of that team is GIS, census and related data products, aerial imagery, and then maintaining our data portal over time. Jeannie Hong is the team leader for that team. And the other team members are Tina Glover, Pete Atwood, Laura Bell, Warren Navarro. Hopefully you've had interactions with one or more of these people in your dealings with SACOG. If you're in this user conference, you're part of the tribe, the loose tribe of people who are really concerned about data and analysis and the role that it plays in transportation planning. And the group of people that I just introduced to you are all really accomplished, and most of the content from today is really provided by them. And you'll hear from almost every one of these people in the sessions today. So that's good on the introductions. Do you want to go to the next slide? I wanted to give you just sort of a high-level overview of the sessions that we've organized. You're in session 1. Traditionally, session 1 has been the place where somebody who's interested in the model but not a model user would come to just kind of hear state of play of the model itself and learn a little bit about the model in terms of what kind of policy analysis it can support. And that's true. We're trying to make that as true as possible today, for sure. The second session is this afternoon, and it focuses on SB 743 and VMT analysis more generally. Tomorrow's sessions, is it 2024 yet? That session is really focusing on how we're setting up for the long-range plan update that will happen in 2024. Session 4 is working smarter, not harder, and it's pretty much a review of some of the model-related or completely independent from the model data sets that we now have access to, and it'll give you some background on what those data sources are and how you can access them. And then session 4 is Thursday. It's the nuts and bolts session. This is where, if you're a travel demand modeler and a practitioner, you'll probably have a chance to really learn some new tricks maybe. It's a session that we're doing a bunch of the content for, but we are getting some help from some of the model user community outside SACOG, some of the consultants that are working on projects around the region. So really appreciate that. We're going to get more of that to happen in future user conferences. And then finally, we sort of have a placeholder for a potential 6th session to be arranged. And it really is, once we've had a chance to kind of process everything that we've heard from this user conference event, we do want to provide some way of feeding back kind of what we've learned from that, and hopefully some final kind of decisions on how we're going to try and take what we've learned and implement some of that in the coming year. So we haven't decided whether that's going to be a session or an email or something else, but there will be some sort of follow-up, and it may be a 6th session to be arranged later in the month or maybe in April. Go on to the next slide. Session 1, I kind of mentioned, it's really that high-level overview for some of the most important things that we do with the travel demand model. And my dog is in the background kind of providing his opinion about my presentation already. Sorry for that. Kyle Shipley is going to talk through the SACSIM model and kind of remind people who probably haven't thought about it since last year what the SACSIM model is and how it functions. And hopefully that's a good refresher. Shengyi Gao is going to talk about one of probably the most important in terms of the statutory functions that SACOG provides is all around clean air, the Clean Air Act and our implementation of that. And it's the air quality and conformity process. It's the process that ends up keeping money flowing, state and federal funds flowing to our transportation projects. And he's going to give you a little bit of details on that. And then Darren Conley is going to talk about some of the other analysis tools that are sort of model and data and regional data related. So that's the setup for today. And then a little bit of the chance to sort of provide some ideas about what we think this coming year will be about and get your input on that. Go on to the next slide. This is, like I said, goal 1 was sort of share what things happened in the past year. I'm probably more proud of this slide than almost anything that we've prepared for this user conference, mainly because 2020 was a tough year to get anything done. And we actually did get a lot of things done from that we made in terms of commitments we made in the last user conference. And I'm just our ability to do that when all sorts of things were sort of providing headwinds or currents that we had to swim against throughout the course of the year made me very proud that we accomplished anything at all, and to get a bunch of things done was really, really cool. But in terms of just the high level highlights, and you're going to hear a little more detail on each one of these throughout the sessions, but we've really developed our website as one of the means of distributing information about our travel demand model. And it's much more evolved in terms of where it was a year ago. If you haven't visited our modeling website, just go to the SACOG website, navigate to the tools and data tab, and you'll see the travel modeling page. There's a lot of information there, and there's links to a ton of other stuff. And then a second thing, and it was really a big ask from the user community last year at the user conference, was just to get our model documentation cleaned up and organized better and a little bit more available. And we feel like we did a good job of that. It's available online. You'll hear a little bit more about that again in the conference itself. The SCS, the Sustainable Community Strategy, which is that's the state version of the 4-year update of our long-range plan. We sort of navigated the SCS, which was actually adopted at the end of 2019, through the whole process of getting reviewed and approved by the California Air Resources Board. That's a gateway to some of the most important SB1 competitive funding for transportation projects. And it's also it's not streamlining, it's streamlining, but CEQA streamlining. Having an SCS that actually meets the target is a gateway to some of the CEQA streamlining that SB 375 has, and getting that accomplished was a huge accomplishment for our group. Finally, there was an MTP amendment and data release. You'll get more on that in session 4. But one thing that we're trying to do to just support the user community a little bit better is just being a little bit more current on when an amendment to the plan is made or an amendment to the TIP is made, to actually package that up and make a full-on SACSIM data release. We have finally figured out how we can make all that happen in a timely manner, and that that's happened in largely in 2020. We just went through an MTIP amendment, and those files are now available online. Finally, there was a fair amount of work on SB 743. We posted VMT maps. We came up with an initial solution for external VMT estimation. Ton of stuff related to the model and SB 743. Again, it's available through our website. And then on big data, 2 years ago, we did a joint agreement with Caltrans and the Air Resources Board to fund a big data for transportation planning pilot project. And that project was going well in advance of last year's user conference, but we're finally starting to that's finally starting to bear fruit, and you'll hear more about that in session 4 for sure. But that project really is starting to move and provide some value to us. And then there was a fair amount of work on, we heard a lot from users on population file and parcel file creation as like the hardest thing and the most expensive and time consuming part of SACSIM, and wanting to make that faster. We didn't really streamline it, but we did clean up a lot of the documentation and the processing. It's not like a one button, easy button kind of click thing, but it's way better than it was at the end of last year. So appreciate a lot of the team's efforts on that. Those are the high level highlights. And you'll hear about more details on each in some of the sessions. Go ahead to the next slide.
And Bruce, I just see that Jimmy Fong has a question, his hand raised.
Sure.
Yeah, if now's a good time. I was just noticing that on the calendar email I received earlier that session 5 on Thursday was, it said it was an afternoon session, but in a couple slides, the nuts and bolts session seemed like it was Thursday morning. So I just wanted to verify.
Thanks, Jimmy. I'm looking at that right now. That's a typo, and it is definitely a morning session. So it should be from 10 a.m. to noon, and we'll send a follow-up for that too.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for noting that. And also on that point, in the email, each session has its different Zoom code. So just be sure to click on the proper Zoom link to get into the session. Looks like everybody was able to get into this one, so that's exciting.
And Kyle, to be clear, you're talking about the email that went out yesterday that has all the links to all the sessions.
Correct. Yeah.
And session 5 is a morning session. That's what we've concluded, right? It's 10 a.m.
Yes, session 5, nuts and bolts, is 10 a.m. Thursday till noon.
Great, thank you. So you've heard a lot from me and a lot from us. Just wanted to do a quick poll to give you a chance to introduce yourself in an efficient way. So Katie, do you want to queue up that poll?
I'll give everyone about 5 more seconds to get your answers in.
And Katie, we'll have 3 questions, right? It's agency, profession. Yep. Yeah, okay,
so
great.
I'll share this first one.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like like the 2 dominant things are Cedar County government and consulting firms, with state and other organizations kind of there. And a goose egg on university and research institutions. I'm sorry to see that.
All right, I'll move into the next poll now.
Bruce, is there a multiple choice option? I mean, you can pick multiple options.
I think you pick the one that you think best describes the work that you do. Like if you had a short elevator ride, what would you tell people you do?
All right, I'm gonna stop the polling. It looks like most people have participated.
And it looks like transportation planning and analysis are the two dominant groups, and a few individuals from CEQA, land use planning, emissions, community advocacy. 67 participants, 2% is maybe 2 people.
All right, and then we'll go into the last one.
And this question is really just to kind of give us an idea of how familiar you are with some of the main things that we do in terms of our group.
For the third question, how familiar are you with the MFAC issued EMFEC? That is a typo.
Give everyone a couple more seconds to get your answers in. Right.
So looks like some familiarity with the travel model, not much familiarity with the open data portal and the info center, or MFAC, or some of the other tools, the project performance assessment and the big data platform, a little bit of familiarity, so great. Hopefully that gives us a sense, and I appreciate you participating in the poll. You want to go to the next slide? So I'm going to hand off to Kyle Shipley, who, as I said, has been the lead for organizing our conference today, and is going to talk to you, just going to give you an overview of SACSIM, travel demand model. Kyle, you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks, Bruce, and welcome everyone. Hopefully that poll gave a little bit of sense of who's here. I know it's not exactly as as we typically have it for introductions, but unfortunately, that's what we have to do. So welcome to our first virtual conference. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right. And Bruce, if I can just get a thumbs up that shared correctly.
You're good, Kyle.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this this presentation is something that if you've been to our previous conferences, you've probably seen a variation of this before. It's really an introduction to travel demand modeling and SACSIM in general. Hopefully, if it's a repeat, it will provide a good overview and a refresher. We feel the session is important to go over for new users and really help provide a bit of context of what the rest of the sessions are going to be taking a deeper dive on during this conference. As Bruce mentioned, this is our travel demand modeling conference. We're really trying to share other data analysis tools that we have, looking at big data trends that are going on right now, but ultimately how this all ties back into our travel demand model and why we do this. So what we're hoping you can kind of get out of this is a little bit stronger understanding of what SACSIM, our travel demand model, is, why we use it, and then what available resources we have available either on request or online to get more information. So why do we use travel demand models in general? As an MPO, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, SACOG is a responsible agency for maintaining the 6-county region, Sacramento region travel demand model based on the CCC, the California Transportation Commission guidelines to meet both state and federal requirements to ultimately prepare the long-range regional transportation plan. So that's a mouthful. Our plan in particular is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It's the federal long-range plan, and then from the state we have the Sustainable Community Strategy. And really, the travel model is our tool to do the performance analysis and a wide variety of performance metrics to meet those statutory requirements and then evaluate projects. So CTC, in consultation with ARB, the Air Resource Board, requires MPOs to publish the methodology, results, and key assumptions of these travel models. And we typically, at a regional travel model, is updated every 4 years as part of this plan. And that's primarily used to for the development and evaluation of projects and plans, looking at transportation improvements, land use development projects. The model really works as a system-wide package to evaluate transportation improvements and really area-wide changes in land use and infrastructure. We use the models to really fill in the gaps of real data that we have available. So currently, no agency has counts and surveys for empirical data for the entire region. And so we take what we have and then we use the models to serve as this knowledge of these gaps. So a bit more of how we use our travel demand model, in particular in California and the SACOG region, is, like I mentioned, for our MTP SCS analysis, we look at project screening and phasing. We use the model for project benefit cost analysis. We look at a wide variety of plan performance metrics such as VMT, roadway congestion, what's the mode shares and splits along the roadways, transit ridership, and a wide variety of other performance metrics. We also use the model to evaluate grant applications. Some of you may be familiar with that or seen the results or been part of that, but it's a way that we can enhance our grant applications for our region. We perform equity analysis and analyze economic development impacts as well. The two other key pieces that we really use the model for are environmental. Air quality conformity from the clean air analysis does the MTP's regional plan and MTIP meet the emission budgets for our region, as well as SB 375, the greenhouse gas reduction, that's the SCS, does the region's MTP and long range plan meet the greenhouse gas reduction targets for our region. So as a whole, we're trying to predict human travel behavior and forecast the demand on transportation infrastructure and the services. SACOG's travel demand model, the latest version we call is SACSIM 19. This is actually our 5th iteration of SACSIM. SACSIM is an activity-based model, meaning the model tracks where people's activity patterns help determine who, whom, and when, and how people are going to decide to travel. So some of you may be familiar with other models. Traditional 4-step travel demand modeling is common, and there's a lot of similar characteristics to this, in that the main difference of an activity-based model, as it infers, is it creates a strong connection of the person or agent particular travel characteristics and those activities, and that's how we generate travel. Activity-based models can be used to evaluate alternative investments and policies that may be difficult to test with traditional trip-based models or sketch planning tools. And SACSIM was adopted in 2008, and it was the first MPO that had an activity-based model. So I just want to go over a couple key concepts here. SACSIM is a simulation-based model. In particular, the simulation portion is one submodule, which is DaySim, that operates as true simulation. There's a variety of other modules, such as commercial vehicles and IXXI, the external travel trips that work similar to a traditional model. But the true simulation portion is our submodule called DaySim. The key aspects to this is it's agent-based. It aggregates or system-wide outcomes to build from an individual agent, agent meaning like a person that we're simulating, and its time is explicitly accounted for. So basically, the activity duration plus the travel time must fit in a typical weekday and during those travel periods. Its predictive outcomes are subject to random effects. So sometimes that causes a bit of noise, but the exact same inputs could generate slightly different results. And this is somewhat on purpose for the simulation in particular way that we develop these. And then you can then take that, put the average runs together and create an average result. So DaySim submodule simulates the travel demand. This is key. So the demand meaning how the travel land use patterns and travel options interact with the population and demographics to affect the way people decide to travel. This is slightly different than other traffic simulations you may have heard, which is in particular the micro simulation, which really focus on the supply side. So what's the performance of the roadway systems that accommodate a fixed demand or a number of distribution of vehicles? Typically in traffic impact studies or other traffic operations analysis, we would develop demand using SACSIM, the travel demand model, and then do further evaluation using these supply models. So going into kind of a little bit more of how SACSIM works, we have these 3 key concepts: the land use, population, and transportation systems. And as I mentioned, it's an activity-based model, and the activities really bring these together. So I'm going to go over these 3 inputs briefly and kind of just talk about what's really built into the model itself. And then these are also going to be discussed further in further sessions that we have. So when we describe land use for the modeling, we're describing regional housing and jobs. This is broken out by housing types, employment sectors, and then really what's their proximity and relationship to each other from distance and using roadways and a bit of looking at the distance between these 2 relationships. The second is the population. So how many people are in the region? What demographic characteristics are associated with them? And we know that these affect people's travel characteristics, such as age, their income, auto ownership, a number of people in their household. And then based on these relationships of these socioeconomic factors and land use characteristics, we can get the travel demand generated for a given scenario. And so that's really kind of the base of how we build the land use and population side into it. And then the third component is the transportation system itself. And what feeds into the model is roads, trails, and transit systems. And then these are all brought together by a person's or household's activities, such as traveling to work, school, shopping, etc. And we model for SACSIM, we model a typical weekday, and this becomes the base of determining the levels of congestion on the roadway and ridership on the transit lines. These performance assessments ultimately help out a particular transportation system in our evaluation of that. So going a little bit deeper into these three components, for land use, we initially collect a land use inventory. We purchase a employment inventory, and we look at households and dwelling units at the parcel level. And then we use a tool called Envision Tomorrow to do the forecasting. This is an open source scenario planning tool. We're going to talk about it a bit more in session 3 tomorrow. And really, this is used to generate the forecasting, looking at community types and residential land use densities. So the second portion of this is the population. As I mentioned, this is used by agents or persons. What we do is we create a representative population. So it's synthetic by nature. And what we do is we use the ACS demographic data at the tract level, and the ACS microsample, or PUMS, which is a person record in our region. And we use this to control both the aggregate demographics and the general location of the people. The ACS microsample provides a pool of anonymized person level records, which to create a representative population. Currently, our population is 2016. We use a open source synthetic population tool called PopGen. We might be discussing later, looking at some other different types of population synthesizers and upgrading this in the future for the next MTP. But that's really how we generate this, and we use a 5-year ACS estimate to create this. So like I mentioned, we have the ACS control totals, and then we have the PUMS sample, and we take those individual records and units to create the samples for the persons and the households. And we'll get a little bit more into the details of how we create this synthetic population and what is in there in session 3. And then finally, for the forecasting, we use regional average demographics by what we call place types, looking at community types, and then of course residential density categories, as well as comparing that to a regional economic growth forecast that we have to control those totals. So I know that's a lot for those two inputs, but like I mentioned, in session 3, we'll have some of our land use forecasting teams to come talk a little bit about how we put that land use forecasting together, the MTP the base inventory team, and then I'll be talking a little bit more about how we put the synthetic population together. So stay tuned for a little bit of that tomorrow. So I want to go through, because this is important for the transportation modeling, the third component, which is the transportation inputs. And by what we mean by transportation inputs, there's 3 primary components that are fed into the model. This is roadways, transit, and bike and walk. The model is a representation of our roadways. It's currently a stick and ball chain, so it's kind of like a GIS file of a representation of collector and above roadways. So some of those characteristics are, we have the different types of roadways, and we define that by capacity class. Really, it's how much capacity vehicle per lane per hour can the roadway serve. And from these, we look at general purpose freeways, several levels of arterials, roadways, collectors, auxiliary lanes, managed lanes, connectors to ramps, and ramp metering. And those are kind of the main capacity classes that are built into the roadway system. This is not exactly the same as FHWA and Caltrans, and we're actually looking at improving and updating some of these inputs as we move along for this next iteration as well. Another input that goes into this is speed. So by default, we use a free flow speed, which is derived by the 85th percentile of observed travel speeds. My colleague Darren's going to talk a little bit about some of the data that we use for this. But then from that, as we iterate through the model, we get congested speeds. And really this is what occurs and shows that the roadway exceeds that capacity and can really to conduce speeds. And finally, a number of lanes. And in this last iteration of SACSIM 19, we also have some tolling attributes. So we can look at analyzing managed lane systems. So the second input of transportation is the transit network. And some key pieces that we have in here is we look at transit by service type. So this includes fixed routes only. So we don't look at paratransit or demand response, but really primarily fixed route corridors. We look at light rail, local bus with frequent stops, express bus, which is fewer stops than a local bus, typically a peak hour service, and generally significant portion of the freeway. We also see these typically have a more higher capacity of boardings and are more typically used on a I guess when everybody is going to work before teleworking. Also, we have park and ride locations, which include the model trips that access transit by driving. The second part of this is headway. So how often does a bus come? And then we have 5 different time periods that reflect this and throughout the day. So we look at AM, midday, PM, early evening, and late day separately. And then finally, we have travel times. So this includes walk time to access transit stops, initial wait times, in-vehicle travel time, transfer times, which is in the transfer, the wait time between those. And then finally, also an additional walk time to the final stop destination. So this is all based on the headways, waiting for a more frequent transit service, then therefore equals a shorter transit wait transfer time. In-vehicle travel time is based on several factors: the congested roadway speed, time factors, which account for transit vehicle dwell times at stops. And then last but not least, we have what is our bicycle network, or representation of bicycle network. This looks at all on-street class 2 bike lanes. We model bicycle distance adjustment factors to account for how many type of bicycle facilities and motor vehicles the volumes affect the perceived distance in the turns and cost of bike trips. So really, what are some impedances on a bicycle travel network? So on-street class 2s, we look at class 1s, where we provide essentially a perceived reduced cost to that being a more desirable route. And then on the other side, we look at higher traffic volumes and areas such as like a freeway overpass, and we add a perceived cost to that as somewhere that may not be as friendly for people to bike. For walk networks, we look at walk trips that are allowed to use any type of facility except for freeways and ramps. So it's very similar to the bicycle network. And then any one-way streets or anything, people can travel in both directions. One thing to note on the walk trips in particular is walk trips don't use the model network. Instead, it uses a orthogonal distance, which is a better representation to the parcel level and the actual roadways to calculate those distances to just be a little more refined. So this slide is really kind of just an overview of those 3 components that I mentioned that go into SACSIM, and then this is really their relationship within DASIM and how these interact using those activities within the travel model itself. So again, some of you guys have maybe seen this before, but I think it's always helpful to kind of go through really what we're talking about when we're saying what is the travel patterns, how are they connected to the land use, and then how do we simulate this and add up those results. So this is just going to be an example. I'm going to really quickly walk through a typical household that we might have in the model. In this example, we have a 4-person household, let's say 2 vehicles, vehicle household, and we're going to look at their daily trip pattern. So one adult drives the kid to the school and then heads to the office. At lunch, they go and pick up some food. They return back to the office. At the end of the day, they go back to school, pick up the kids, and then head home. Say the other adult during that typical day, they'll go drive off to maybe a major employment center or an area of destination, say downtown. And then on their way back, they'll stop at a grocery shopping trip and they'll return home. After those work trips occur, there can be an additional trip where the kids go to baseball practice and then they return home. So again, this is just an example. There's a wide variety of examples that this could be, but an example of a household and person trips. So if we look at all these trips combined, you can see the numbers represented with the arrows. This household has 17 person trips for the day, 11 vehicle trips where the person trips were all in a carpool or shared mode. And then just as an example, the total vehicle miles traveled was 45 miles. And then this is really kind of the results that we use from the travel model. So that's kind of how the travel model works. A lot of what we have to do is before we evaluate, we really need to check the SACSIM for reasonableness. And a lot of the work that's done at SACOG, as well as others that use the model, and really why we have this user conference and user group is really the calibration, validation, and sensitivity testing. So all the fun things, but they're really important on, do we feel like SACSIM is a reasonable model to use? So for the development of the model, like I mentioned, this is the 5th iteration of SACSIM. So they're all building off each other. We had a 2000 household travel survey, and then in 2018 we had a brand new household travel survey. So this is really a key component to capturing the full person's travel and how we develop the activity-based models. The next portion is the calibration. So adjusting the model parameters in effect to make the model replicate observed data from a base year to produce more reasonable results. Next, we do a validation, which sometimes gets mixed up with calibration, but the validation is really a key standalone step where we compare SACSIM to outputs of observed conditions. Typically, these are traffic volumes, transit ridership counts, and we really are trying to get trying to have the model replicate observed conditions before we do any forecasting. We're going to talk about this a little bit more at project evaluations, but this is really important, and the validation is really based on kind of the level of detail you need for your analysis. We also do a wide range of reasonableness checks looking at trip lengths, trip rates, and a lot of this, like I mentioned, comes from household travel surveys. So I mentioned before that the California Transportation Commission maintains these guidelines, and so we really use these guidelines to provide. They have validation recommendation thresholds to do static and dynamic validation. And then we also do additional sensitivity testings. So really what this means is ensuring SACSIM is reasonable for sensitivity of key factors that have an effect on travel. So what sensitivity do we have to different demographics, such as age and income, land use, such as density, mixed use, and then transportation. What about accessibility, proximity to transit, and street patterns, such as a grid or kind of the lollipop section? How does the model what's the sensitivity level to these different types of changes? Some of the model results to evaluate the model performance of these sensitivity tests look at VMT, the mode share, and then, like I mentioned, the trip lengths and transit boardings. And then finally, we also, like I mentioned, SACSIM, you know, I think I've said this before, it's complicated, but it's an open book. Anybody's welcome to use it, providing you have the software to run it. And we find this to be extremely helpful. We have not only internal reviews, but we have reviews during our MTPSCS from the California Resource Board, FHWA, and Caltrans, as well as local member agencies are all using our models. Their consultants are typically using it at a detailed project evaluation level, and all of this really helps kind of refine the model and continue to review and repeat and make sure that it's reasonable for validation and project use. So real quickly, just want to go over a couple features that are in SACSIM 19. These are some of kind of the advanced features on really why we use this model for some of the difficult policy questions that were asked. In the latest version, we can analyze managed lanes. This is potentially a funding source for if the gas tax revenues decline. It's also a means to manage congestion. We're looking at high occupancy toll lanes where you can limit a specific number of lanes on a corridor to HOV drivers, and then there's a toll that's paid by single occupancy vehicles. We can also look at all toll lane facilities, and some of this is being used in projects in the region, in particular District 3 managed lane studies. The model also has a pay-as-you-go or a VMT price, so you can look at what the cost of travel is based on a VMT. This is one of the things we can do by having the person-based model, where we can really associate the travel back to a evaluation of time in that particular person's characteristics. And then finally, we have autonomous vehicle and connected vehicle inputs. None of this is set, since we don't know exactly there's not much real world information on what these are going to be for the future, but we've provided a wide range of parameters to do risk analysis and really AV testing and assumptions, such as you know, AV adoption rates, what are highway capacity, if AVs are a larger penetration, they may have an increased lane capacity. What are the effects on household and age and income, and then impacts and adjustments to vehicle ownership with maybe a more shared community using the autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles. And then finally, the adjustments to travel times due to lower costs and the ability to engage in activities while traveling. So some of the applications that we use the travel demand model. This figure here is an example of how we evaluate capacity projects as part of our SCS, MTP SCS. So this helps us look at expected growth areas and then pair those with transportation infrastructure where there's a demand. Other examples, these are just, as I mentioned, some quick examples. This is transit accessibility to jobs at LIM areas, so low minority EJ, environmental justice areas. We can use this to help create equity plans. We can also, as I mentioned earlier, look at air quality conformity. SACSIM is a source to calculate the VMT, which then is fed into MFACT to estimate emissions, which really helps our member agencies keep the money flowing to meet the state and federal requirements. So it's a huge and really important thing that we do with the travel demand model, and Xingyi is going to talk about it in a little more detail shortly. And then finally, like I mentioned, we can analyze VMT. We can look at these trends. This map in particular is looking at household VMT per capita, and then as well as a trend line of how is the VMT changing over time. Like I mentioned earlier, we can also split this into community types. So this is just breaking that down into kind of one step further, comparing our base year to our horizon year, and VMT by community type and those average per capita. So those are just some examples of how we apply SACSIM. I know that some of this was maybe a little too deep for some of you and not enough for others. And so as Bruce mentioned, I really wanted to provide some links. This year we heard a lot of people requesting more documentation, more users guides. And so we've spent a lot of time enhancing our website to really provide a much deeper dive on how to use the model, as well as documentation on the theoretical what's the being used and what's the sources of how the model works itself. We also have more detailed presentations from past conferences on some of these features, and you can see those on the website as well under model user conferences. So, and if you have any further questions regarding SACSIM, like I said, you can feel free to reach out to me directly, or access the website at sacog.org/modeling. So I think here I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions in particular regarding SACSIM or the MTP. And after that, Shengyi Gao is going to prepare to give a little more presentation on how we use the travel model for our air quality conformity analysis. So I'm just looking real quickly at the chat. Class 4 bikeways are included. Yep, thanks, Bruce. Yes, they're included. So if there's no other questions, I will hand this over to Shengyi. Oh, now I see more questions coming in. Do the city and counties use modeling techniques to measure greenhouse gas emission reductions for climate adaptation plans? Yes, the model can be used for this. We actually just recently posted SACSIM 19 scripts on our website, in particular our GitHub, which Darren will talk a bit more on this, and everybody is welcome to use those to analyze that. There's a bit of the question for the climate adaptation plans on how to calculate which type of VMT analysis to use, which I think is a further conversation, but the model can absolutely do that type of work. I have a question. The forecast showed lower VMT in coming years. Is that due to state bills? I'm not sure exactly about that. A lot of our VMT at the regional level, we're really looking at how we're better pairing our land use and with our transportation infrastructure to reduce VMT per capita moving forward.
Yeah, and piling in a little bit on the response to that question.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Bruce.
On what drives lower VMT in the future. It's a combination of many things, and it's hard to say it's any one thing. There is some really good material in the SCS that breaks down the various factors that influence reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and that's based on how we actually do our SB 375 analysis. There's a pretty strong correlation between GHG and VMT. So that's probably the best place to try and get an answer to that question. It's not something I can just sort of cough up, but it's a combination of travel costs, land use change in transportation options that are offered to people through the transportation network, and aging of the population is a part of that too, as well as some TDM measures too. So it's a complicated mix. And I put a note to all, just Kyle showed a slide related to the Title VI equity analysis that we've done historically for the last few MTPs. You know, we mentioned at the top of this session about COVID and its impact on what this year has really undid and how this year has unfolded. There's obviously been a huge conversation around race, equity, and inclusion. That's affected our board just like it's affected a lot of public agencies. We have a working group at board level focusing on race, equity, and inclusion. We're hoping that for our next plan, we'll have something beyond just the statutorily required Title VI analysis in terms of how we factor and include the impacts that race and equity and inclusion have on how people travel. Again, a work in progress.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I know, again, I glossed over a lot of things, but that's also, we're hoping to have a bit of a discussion of that in the nuts and bolts session 5. So if you're interested, tune into that. We'll have some presenters and then time for really a deeper dive of how best can we use the travel model to do this type of analysis. And we're hoping to get you know, everybody's feedback on that. All right, so if I'm seeing no further questions, I'm going to hand this over to Xingyi Gao.
Good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen. What?
Looks good, Xingyi.
Oh, that's good. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Xingyi Gao, and I'm in charge of air quality conformity analysis in SACOG. So the purpose of my presentation is to give you a high-level review about the workflow of air quality conformity in SACOG and why it is important. So then, what is the air quality conformity? So SACOG is required by law to demonstrate that transportation and land use plans will result in the vehicle emissions that conform with the state and the federal standards. And then the conformity will ensure transportation does its part to clean the air, and also ensures that the project are qualified to receive state and federal funding. So that said, if we cannot meet all the cannot conform the state and federal standard, that we will not be able to receive the funding from state and federal agency. So there are, at the federal level, there are a lot of laws and regulations. The most important one is the Clean Air Act. It identified 6 pollutants and also authorized the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to set standards for these pollutants. So since these pollutants have the emission standards, so it is called criteria pollutants. So the law also created the programs at the different levels to enforce these standards. So at the federal level, it's called a Transportation Improvement Program. At the state level, it's called a State Implementation Plan. And at the metropolitan level, it's called a Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Plan. So simply, we call it the MTIP. So as you can see, I highlighted a few the pollutants here. So these are the pollutants of what matter to our region. So you saw the map earlier from Cal's presentation. So this map basically shows the non-emitting status of our region. So on the left, as you can see, so in terms of the ozone and the PM 2.5, the part of El Dorado, Placer counties are non-attainment area, and the Sacramento County and Yolo County are non-attainment area, and the Yuba and the Sutter maintenance area. And for PM10, we do not have non-attainment area, and only for Sacramento County, it is a maintenance area. So then what is a non-attainment area? So even an area does not meet the national primary or secondary ambient air quality standard, and then it is called a non-attainment area. So a maintenance area means an area that is subject to the provisions of a maintenance plan that included in the state implementation plan, and that has been redesignated by Environmental Protection Agency from non-attainment area to attainment area. So besides those pollutants regulated by federal governments, and California also regulates the emissions of GHG, the most two important bills are AB 32 and SB 375. So as you can see from the here, so for SACOG, SACOG is required to reduce the GHG by 19% in year 2035. So this is the reduction target for our metropolitan transportation plan. By the way, the GHG is not required by federal law, so we do not need to analyze the GHG for the conformity analysis. So the metropolitan transportation improvement plan. So it is a short-term plan. We updated it every 2 years. It includes a full list of transportation projects. All these projects already have a committed funding from federal and the state. So based on all the transportation projects, and we do aggregate regional conformity analysis, and the analysis result is subject to public review. So and then SACOG is responsible to respond to all the public reviews. So once it is go through the public review, and the SACOG staff will submit the plan to SACOG board for adoption. So when it is adopted by SACOG board, it will be submitted to EPA for approval. So this is the general workflow of MQ process. So basically, so sorry for the incoming phone call. So for the general flow, so based on all the transportation projects that were affected emissions, we were coded in our modeling network. And then we run a SACSIM activity-based model to estimate the VMT by speed. So, and then the VMT by speed band will be the inputs of MFACT, so which is a model developed by Air Resource Board to estimate the emissions. So then we do a budget test to see if the total emissions is under the budget. So then what is the budget? So the budget is the maximum total emissions for each pollutant in a region set by Environmental Protection Agency. The total emissions must be smaller than the budget. So the different from the MTP, MTP is a long-term regional transportation development plan. And then for this plan, we do the long-term social economic forecast, we do land use forecast, and we also do the transportation projects, the planning with the financial constraints. So that projects include the projects that we are going to implement in short term, and then also the proposed projects in long term, and based on our forecast of transportation the revenue. So then we run SACSIM model to estimate VMT, and again, this VMT by speed band will be the input of the MFACT, and based on the MFACT results, we will do the budget test for the environmental impact report of MTP, and do the GHG target test to see if the total GHG reduction target is hit or not. So this is my presentation. So I'm happy to answer your questions. So for any question I cannot answer right now, and this a more detailed discussion, you just contact me through my email. Thank you. So any questions?
Thanks, Shengyi. I'm checking the chat. I don't see anything right now, but I think we can probably move ahead and have Darren go. But if anybody has further questions for Shengyi, please just drop it in the chat, and we'll try to answer these as we go.
Okay, thanks everyone.
All right, I guess I'll go next. Let me share my screen here. Can you all see it?
Looks good, Darren.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. My name is Darren Conley. I work with Kyle and Shengyi on the modeling team. Today, I'm going to give a survey of some of the various other tools that SACOG has been using for transportation analysis. These tools are not directly a part of the SACSIM model itself, but they some of them do leverage some of SACSIM's inputs and outputs, such as the input layers and some of the output products of model runs. And this session is mainly just a high-level survey to give sort of a teaser introduction to what these tools are. And if any of them spark your interest or you're curious to know more, I'll also provide information on which sessions will have more specific discussion of each tool. And the first tool is SACOG's Project Performance Assessment Tool. I imagine a good number of you have heard about this, this tool. It's a web-based project evaluation tool. The screenshot on the right shows what the web interface looks like. And it calculates, basically you as a user, you draw a line in an interactive web map representing the extent of your project, whether it's a bike lane or a widening or a new road or whichever, and you hit a run button, and after chugging for several minutes, the tool calculates about 80 different land use, transportation, and safety metrics for the project. And using those metrics, the tool was helped to score around 100 different projects that were seeking funding in SACOG's 2020 competitive funding round. Some of the data layers that it uses include the GTFS-based transit schedule data. It uses typical traffic speeds from NPM-RDS, and also some parcel level future year job and population data. If you want more information on it, it'll be discussed in more detail in session 5. Here's some example outputs from the PPA. The map on the left shows collision data with the project line, an example project line overlaid on it. And the chart on the right compares free flow versus congested speeds for that project line. So again, if any of this is interesting to you, both as a consultant or as a jurisdiction, definitely stick around for session 5 on Thursday. Next tool is called Cube Access. It used to be called Sugar Access, but it's now called Cube Access. As the name implies, Cube Access measures accessibility. So as an example, the map on the right-hand side shows access to jobs within a 45-minute transit trip from each block group, with darker colors indicating somebody in that block group B is able to get to more jobs within a 45-minute transit trip. But it allows, it sort of provides a nice supplement to SACSIM, because SACSIM you can also use for accessibility, but this is much deeper because it's using observed data. It's much more granular geometries. It's actually also customizable geometries, like you could use block groups, accessibility at the block group level, at the TAS level, the census tract level, and it uses observed accessibility data like an all streets road network with actual traffic speeds. It uses GTFS for transit service. And it also has a much more granular set of destination types. So not just jobs, but like grocery stores, schools, universities, etc. So I encourage you to stick around to check it out. If you want to learn more, they'll be discussed more in session 4. Next tool is the Remix Transit Planning tool. It's geared, as the name suggests, toward planning agencies. SACOG staff and RT actually used Remix in helping plan out its 2019 route optimization, and also SACOG coordinated with RT to plan its Smart Ride on-demand transit service, as well as the recently implemented UC Davis Causeway connection, and it also makes Remix available to local transit operators to use it. And one of the big sells for Remix compared to just a travel model is that it allows like sort of a sandbox to really play around and experiment with different operations scenarios. So you can say, if I run this frequency along this route, you know, how much is it going to cost? And in operations, how many vehicles will I need? So it allows, and also how many, it allows market analysis too, like how many people will be within a 5 or 10 minute walk of the route you're proposing. So it's a great tool for more granular operations planning and transit market analysis. Next element is NPM RDS speed data. Data are provided free to MPOs and state DOTs and can be made available to consultants working on behalf of MPOs. And the data are essentially archived vehicle travel times available at 5-minute intervals. And within the SACOG region, it covers over 7,000 roadways, but the data are available for national highway roads nationwide. And the source of the data is in-vehicle GPS systems and mobile devices like cell phones with location tracking and applications enabled. I'm going to go through just one example of how it was used was in SACOG's most recent congestion management process update. And this is just a map showing changes in travel speeds during peak periods between 2016 and 2019. And just an example of where something pops out is on 80 over the top, as they call it, going through north of Thomas and El Paso Heights. Looking at the colors, this area actually sped up a lot. The congested speeds increased a lot between 2016 and 2019. And part of that is due to Caltrans completing its over-the-top HOV lanes project, which not only added capacity, but reduced all the construction activity, which can significantly affect operations and slow down speeds. Again, more on this during session 4 tomorrow. So stick around if you want to learn more about how SACOG has used and will be using the speed data. One of those uses we'll discuss more is we will be using it to help calibrate travel free flow speeds in the travel model. Another element, another tool, which Sheng-Yi will be going into much more detail on tomorrow as well, is Replica, our big data pilot project. Replica, just like the name suggests, creates a replica of a typical travel day, representing just giving a simulation of all the trips taken within the region on a typical day. And it's based from extrapolating on a wide variety of observed data sources, ranging from census data to cell phone movement data to credit transaction data. And it creates, using that creates a rich simulation of human activity and travel throughout a day. Just again, Sheng-Yi will give a lot more information on it, but I want to show two quick examples of it in use. This example is showing the census block group where the Roseville Galleria is located. And the map is showing where people that are going there, where they're coming from. So this is just one neat sort of analysis, like a zonal analysis, where you can select a zone and get information about all the trips that are going to or from that zone. Another example of sort of a custom, not right out of the box analysis you can do with the raw data is you can do very detailed quarter level analysis. So this is a profile of trips throughout the day on Business 80 going northbound over the American River in fall of 2019. And some things that pop out in this chart are not surprisingly during the AM peak, that big blue spike is people making work trips. So a lot of the trips using that during the AM peak are work trips. During the PM peak, that big gray area is all people going home, which is, again, not surprising. And during the PM peak is usually people going home. And these are just two examples. There are tons of different analyses you can do with Replica, and Sheng-Yi will give you a little more of a deeper dive into it during session 4. Next up is our SACOG Open Data Portal. Our colleague Jeannie will give more information on it again in session 4, and it provides it basically provides a lot of relevant data for planning, such as transportation data, infrastructure data, boundaries. A lot of it is in GIS format as well as CSV. The link is there, but also, again, stick around for session 4 if you want to learn more about it. Census products. Tina will be going into much more census products, but given that it is 2021, a lot of 2020 data are available or will be available soon. Gina, during session 4, will give more information on some of the data dissemination dates for block level census redistricting data. One thing to know is that the 2020 census geographies are now available. So like you can get the block group geographies and the shape files and so forth, but they don't have any of the actual census data within them yet. Another announcement is that data.census.gov has replaced American Fact Finder. But again, these are just some of the key updates. Please stick around for more information on during session 4. And in case it's not easy to follow which sessions have which information, I will end us on this slide. So if you want to learn more about these tools, just make note of which session to go to, and it also says when that session starts. You will notice that one of the things I discussed that will not be in these sessions is the Remix Transit Planning app. However, if you do want to learn more about the transit planning app, please reach out to our transit specialist, Michael Rawson, and his email is provided there below. And that's it. I'm open for any questions.
Thanks, Darren. I think it's also worth noting, Bruce mentioned that these will be recorded. We'll also, at the end of the conference, upload all of these slides so you can all have access to this information and the additional resources and links.
All right, thanks, Kyle. I'm gonna stop sharing now. Let me see.
All right. So it looks like we're doing pretty good on time. I think if we, I want to take a pause here, and if anybody wants to unmute and ask any questions or discussion on any of the topics that we've talked about so far, I think this would be a good time to do it. I know it's a difficult forum to do that, but we really do appreciate any feedback, and thanks to everyone that's been asking questions in the chat. Bueller. All right. Well, hearing nothing right now, like I mentioned, feel free to reach out to us afterwards. I think we'll have probably more detailed discussions in some of the sessions coming up. But I want to hand this back over to Bruce to talk a little bit more about some of the future model development and support that we're going to have. And I think we have another poll on this topic.
Yeah, great. And I'm waiting for slides to kind of catch up to me. Sorry for the scroll, people. Yeah, it's that looking forward slide, Katie. Any difference? So again, one of the things we do want to do with the user conferences, and I'm assuming people are seeing this slide. Kyle, can you looking for some feedback that we've got the slide up there? There we go.
Yes, I can see looking forward 2021 and beyond.
Yeah, great. Yeah, one of the things we want to do is just get let you know sort of what things we're tracking and looking forward to for this year and beyond, and get some feedback from you on that. So this is just the really high level version of what that looks like for us. And a bunch of the work, you know, there's that 4-year cycle of updating our long range plan. And it does have kind of a painting the Golden Gate Bridge quality to it. Almost as soon as you finish with one, you need to start preparing for the next. And we're in the midst of that preparation already. So the base year update is really our chance to kind of reset the land use forecast, the detailed land use forecasts, and the population forecasts, or the population estimates that are, you know, for the base year of our plan, as well as updating roadway, transit, bike, and walk networks. That whole process is really led by Jeannie Hong and her data and mapping services team, as well as many other individuals around the agency. And session 3, Jeannie will have a chance to kind of let you know what that is. And that's going to be a big area of activity. It's a huge amount of effort to kind of take account of what's happened over 4 years on development. But it's even more of a challenge now to take account of what's happened on demographics, housing occupancy, and all the stuff that affects how land use and demographics translates into what is the population that the regions, you know, that's within the region and needing travel. There's some basic model improvements and updates that go into that. We don't currently, other than recognizing that the pandemic and all the changes we've had to adapt to, basically, through the course of this last year are likely to have some sort of long-term impact. We don't have any specific improvements to the model currently planned out. We have improvements to just the representation of travel networks. And part of that is related to just updating to what's been built. But part of that will probably be looking at updating free flow speeds and trying to do more of a comprehensive update of that. So that's on our mind as far as model improvements and updates. The SACSIM recalibration is something that we expect that we will need to do to just minimally account for what changes to travel are happening in real time right now. The timing of that, like, we're reluctant to put out a time when that's going to happen because the changes really haven't stopped yet. And we haven't really assembled enough information on what the changes have stabilized out to do that. But our assumption is that we will be doing some sort of recalibration to SACSIM to capture, like, just if we had to do it today, we would try and capture more work at home. We would try and capture more online shopping. We would try and capture some of the known effects at aggregate level about changing time of travel and the purposes that drive people to travel outside the home. That said, we have very imperfect data on that right now, and we hope that we have a better assessment of that to guide a recalibration before the next plan adoption. And then the other kind of preparatory thing for the 2024 MTP SES, each year we've gotten, or each plan we've gotten a little bit more focused on project level performance, and partly that's just trying to keep up with CTC and other state agencies that are, and federal agencies that are expecting a higher level of assessment of projects at project level in what we do. And part of it is just trying to keep up with the changing demands of our board and over time. So we do expect that there will be a renewed focus on project prioritization, project assessment. That will be part, and it'll be reflected in the MTP, and part of that will be work that we do. There's obviously more than just the technical side of it. There's the planning side of it and the public information side of that too. So it's going to be our team plus others working around the agency to make that all happen. Those are the preparatory things for the upcoming MTP. And then in terms of modeling, analysis, and supports that might be more outward facing, we've done a lot this year to try and engage, like I said, with our user community. And part of that is being a little bit more involved in some of, especially projects that Caltrans is doing, managed lanes projects, and providing support for some of the new aspects of SACSIM 19 that, like the price, all the pricing functionality. We're expecting that to continue. The improved data and mapping services, really that comes down to pushing more data out through our open data portal and being able to share more of the data that we develop for the travel model through the portal. The streamlining of model inputs and preparing processes, that's trying to respond to the desire to just have quicker, more efficient tools to help you use the model better. There is no easy button planned. We didn't think we had the wherewithal on consulting to do kind of an easy button version of preparing a parcel or a population file, but we do want to continue that improvement that we started last year. And then we just have to be mindful that I know for a lot of our member agencies, their budgets are extremely taxed, you know, starting with sales tax reductions and going on and on from there in terms of what this year has meant on budget. It's affected us too. And we're trying to do a little bit more with a little bit less this year in terms of the ability to assemble funding for outsourcing of work and hiring of consultants where we need them. So there is a little bit of that in this year, looking forward to. That's about all I had, and I hope we can get some comment and discussion going on this. I'm trying to wait until people really do have a chance to say something if they get off mute, all that stuff. We did also have a poll on some of these topics prepared. Katie, why don't you, let's give people another 30 seconds or so and then go to the poll.
Hey, Susan, I see you're off mute and I see your question in the chat. Do you want to just raise it to the group?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, hi, I'm Susan Hervey, and I wanted to ask if you could estimate roughly what percentage of the greenhouse gas reductions that are required by SB 32 for the whole SACOG region for the year 2030, what percentage does the 19% greenhouse gas reduction in passenger vehicle related greenhouse gas emissions per capita, is there a relationship that you could describe between those two metrics? The 19% greenhouse gas reduction target in passenger vehicle greenhouse gas emissions per capita, and the SB 32
Sure.
reduction. Thank you.
Kyle, I'll try and at least respond to that. I'm not going to be able to answer it, Susan. I think one of the costs of all the targets that are floating around is a little bit of target confusion that those have generated, and your question is a perfect example of that. And I'm confused too at times, so I got to be honest and transparent that I don't know all the answers to the questions you're asking. The basic response though, Susan, is it's not all of it. It's clearly not all of it. CARB has told us that when you look at the end of their scoping plan, what they still are short is about the 19% reduction that is part of our SB 375. They actually need something like 25% to actually fully meet the overall SB 32 goals. How that relates back to 1990 and all that stuff, I don't really know the answer to, but like the two things that I get asked occasionally, and it's a confusing thing, and it's come up a lot on SB 743, because SB 743 sort of put the guidance for that put out 15% reduction as in VMT as kind of the needed reduction for to be not a significant impact in an SB 743 CEQA analysis, and a lot of people think, well, we're getting 19% GHG, how can that not get 15%? And that is it's a confusing thing, and it falls into that same category of like, we have so many different numbers floating around and how do you sort them all out? But the 19%, just like you said, is relative to 2005. And the 15% that SB 743 kind of put into the world really is related to a base year of around 2018 in terms of VMT per capita. And so, 15% from 2018 is way more than 19% from 2005, unfortunately. And so our plan, though it met the 19% greenhouse gas reduction target, we could not with a straight face say that we would meet a 15% VMT reduction from base year. So I apologize for my part in building that confusion, but there's no simple answer to that question, unfortunately. Does that help in terms of at least putting it into some context?
Yeah, early on in what you just said, you said something about the 19% SB 375 relative to the 25% to meet SB 32. Are those two sort of in comparable metrics so that I could, I mean, that's, if that's true, that's a very large percentage of what's needed for SB 32.
Yeah, so what the scoping plan told us is that our target needed to be 25% for the state overall to achieve the SB 32. So there's a gap of 6%, and that gap is talked about as a 6% gap by a lot of different people. You know, it changes in real time because the actual VMT also changes, unfortunately.
Okay.
But the scoping plan also said that the state was going to initiate a larger discussion around the state, including MPOs and including other organizations, and how to fill that gap, if you will, with additional reductions. And that is just at best, it's just now starting. So we're really interested in participating in that conversation, but we know how hard it's been to kind of to demonstrate that we could get to 19%, and getting to a higher percentage is pretty daunting.
Yes.
Anyway.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Susan. Any other questions for Bruce? Anything?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Sean from Caltrans District 3. I have a question for you. Every time you just recalibrate your model, SACSIM model, and improvement, can you provide us, or maybe provide a version of a new added project or new calibrated section? For example, like every new version of software, they will have what's new in this new version, so we can compare the previous version. So it's easy for us to know where did you improve your network and your project. So that might help us to know for the other projects. Is that possible? So that's my question.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing is better documentation between the versioning, and then as well as you're describing the calibration really show what the change is. We're actually going to be talking a little bit about this in the session 4, but I think Bruce mentioned we just released a new MTIP network, and so what that's going to include is a full new version of basically a suite of the travel demand model scenarios that we did for the MTP SCS, but with those MTIP improvements. So the different any projects or that changed during that time, as well as any additional adjustments that we have made in the model. The model's ongoing. It's always used for projects. This user community really helps out in providing feedback and needs for the model, and so we're constantly improving that. And I think this version, I'm really excited about that we really have a great improvement on our documentation on that change. So I can talk a little bit more towards that in the following session, as well as that will be on our website. In terms of larger changes, we typically our model changes from plan to plan. So previously we had a version of SACSIM 15 to SACSIM 19. In the plan appendix, we have a table with all of those changes. That was a pretty significant change because we really adjusted the software itself, and that included adding valuation of time bins, different time periods, adding pricing. And so there was some significant changes there, and that's all documented in the model documentation plan appendix as well. And I can send you links to both of those documents.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Sparky, I see your hand is raised.
All right, Kyle, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, question's kind of out of left field. Just came to mind, and if there's not an answer, that's fine. Darren did mention the PPA and its ability to analyze some safety data. I'm just wondering, has there been any discussion associated with the model doing more safety analysis, considering that it looks like we're going to have to start doing some level of safety analysis per Caltrans guidelines. And I think a lot of us are still trying to wrap our heads around how to do that. And getting some help from the model, I think, would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the Caltrans safety guidelines. Does that have to do with forecasting, or really what's existing safety based on the project? And
it's pretty much project analysis associated with CEQA.
Okay. Darren, do you want to talk a little bit of what is in the PPA tool and how it relates to the model data we have? I think, Sparky, I don't have any, we don't have any safety related updates in terms of the forecasting to add to SACSIM, but perhaps that's something we should be looking into.
Yeah, I mean, PPA safety data, it's looking just at, you know, collisions that have already happened. Sparky, were you thinking more of something of incorporating a component into the travel model where, in addition to, you know, forecasting travel demand, it would forecast like potential increases in or decreases in collisions? Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yes. Yeah, something
Okay.
along those lines.
Yeah.
I don't see that in the near future, Sparky. We as a MPO, SACOG has a role in implementation of what's known as the federal performance management rules, and performance management rule 1 is on safety. The state adopts targets. We have to do our part to kind of help the state and support the state in any way that we can in achieving those targets. Those targets have to do with reducing the rates of fatalities and serious injuries relative to the amount of travel that's happening. We're clearly off. We're not meeting those targets. The trends are almost going the wrong way now. But safety for SACOG is primarily about making sure that projects that are about safety, you know, are focused on areas where the need is the greatest. And we do try and help with that process of picking projects or identifying projects and prioritizing projects that do that. All that said, the projects come primarily from you guys. So to the degree that you're proposing more safety projects, and those safety projects identify areas where the collisions or fatalities or safety problems are the worst, hopefully that leads to some sort of improvement. I have heard that people are starting to look at instance of accidents as a factor that influences travel demand. In other words, if you're living in an area where there's a high rate of accidents, that affects the choices about whether you go out on a bike or walk or your car, or what kind of car you buy, all those things. We currently do not have a plan for building any of that into the demand modeling. And if what I'm hearing from you is at least a hope that we get on that. And at this point, Sparky, we appreciate you bringing that comment up. It will be part of what we look at in terms of how we approach maybe a recalibration. Is there any meaningful safety data that we could look at to do that? But I don't want to give you a lot of hope that there's going to be a big, huge play on that this year. If there was more funding around, I could see potentially trying to find a way to do that in this calendar year. I think it's always going to turn into a little bit more long-term thing. And if you're interested in trying to work with SACOG or anybody else to identify funding to help support something like that, there may be something we can do, but I think it's going to be a longer-term play. That's my guess.
I appreciate that, Bruce.
All right, thanks, Sparky. Jimmy Bong, did I see your hand raised previously?
Just
no, I thought I had it turned off from before.
So I did put Xiang, you asked for, and a very fair ask, something that compares SACSIM 19 to 15, just with the changes that was part of that. I had provided a link to an SCS appendix that sort of summarized all that. And I just sort of re-upped that link and identified pages 45 and 46, I think, are the pages where there is that tabular comparison between the two iterations of the model. And Jung, just to remind you, that is something that we tend to do every 4 years. It's not something we do all the time. It's the most of the other improvements that Kyle mentioned that are more like ongoing. It's changes to as projects, as the projects themselves, either the scheduling or the scope change, we have to adapt the highway and transit and bike and walk networks to reflect that. That's part of that MTIP amendment process. That's an ongoing thing, and it happens much more frequently, but the recalibration is really something that happens pretty much every 4 years, and it's not something
Hello.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, the question, I just talking about the future MTP. So I'm not talking about the SACSIM 15 and 19. So in the future, maybe you can make a map. It's a different one. So we can easy to identify. So for our, where did you improve your network? Where's your new project added to your model? So we can easy to make some modification for our future project. That is why I'm talking about. Thank you. Yeah.
great. And I am going to toot my horn just a tiny little bit. The with this last MTIP amendment, we did finally produce just like a set of version notes, and I'm looking at Kyle. Kyle, is that's now available?
That is now available, and essentially this is the rollout. So that was like a feeder question of we do have maps showing those changes, and we'll roll them out on tomorrow.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And so it looks like we have about a minute left. Madi, are you on the call? I just wanted to give a quick little introduction to, hopefully Madi can give us an introduction to what this afternoon session is going to be. And if anybody has any general kind of overview questions on the following sessions.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Kyle. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. So session 2 will be later today from 1 to 3 p.m. And we'll be going over SB 743 implementation and VMT analysis. So I'll provide updates on our SB 743 local agency working group, what we've done, and then what we're hoping to accomplish in 2021. And then I'll be talking about that at a high level. And then Cameron Hsu with the County of Sacramento will share a local's perspective on implementing SB 743 and some early lessons learned. And then Bruce, who you've heard from today, he's going to be sharing some resources that SACOG staff has developed, as well as some analysis on VMT and how big data can assist us in VMT analysis. So hope to see you all there, and hope to see you at the rest of our sessions. Thanks.
Thanks, Mari. All right, so it's noon. We will reconvene in an hour. Everybody grab some lunch and get up. Like I mentioned earlier, each session has its own Zoom link. So reference the email that you were sent yesterday and make sure to click onto the session 2. That should also have some details on the upcoming sessions. So if there's any topics you're particularly interested in, look at those detailed agendas. And if you have any further questions or something that's not seen, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And thank you very much for attending this virtual session.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.